Hey everybody, Jake here from Bearded Gear, and I have a first impressions to do for you. In fact, I actually have a couple of first impressions to do for you that will be uploading over the next couple of days from when you're watching this. But usually I shoot these outdoors. I try to do that whenever possible. It's just frankly not possible today. My water heater exploded last night, and so I'm waiting for a guy to come who's going to be fixing that today, and so I'm kind of confined to the house for that reason. But I'm also on some antibiotics right now. I don't have coronavirus. I don't know if antibiotics would even fix that anyways, but it's nothing crazy major, but the antibiotics are a little bit intense, and I'm not supposed to be in the sun for too long, and I just, in general, I'm trying to be a little more low-key while I'm on this medication. Don't worry, I will be fine. Everything's okay. But anyways, so I want to share the knives that I got from YD Knives, because with each of them I've had the opportunity to put them in pocket enough to kind of give my first impressions, and then as I keep building experiences with them, I'll be preparing for my full review. So that's just the cadence of how it makes sense in my mind to do this. And if I keep putting it off until I'm able to get out in the mountains, I'm going to be past when it's actually a first impressions, and it's going to be like an early review. Anyway, this is an XM18. YD Knives loaned it to me. His link to his Instagram will be in the description down below. He's become a good friend at this point. He sent me an obscene amount of knives this time, and all very nice knives. So, a big thank you to him. Anyway, this XM18 I wanted to do first because I've had a lot of people say that I should review an XM18 and kind of request that I do because they want to hear my thoughts on it for whatever reason. And it's a knife that I've wanted to review one for a long time. I've wanted to own one for quite a while, but they're pretty pricey, and frankly, I owned a Zero Tolerance 0562 for a while. That was one of the first nicer knives I got when I got into collecting. The one I had was even modded to be more like an XM18, so it was the 562 CF, and I think that one was in 20 CV, if I remember correctly, and it had been modded to have a forward finger choil. So the ergos were actually, this feels to me strikingly similar to how it felt holding that knife. It brings back some memories. That one was also on bearings, like this new Tri-Way is currently set up wearing. So I've wanted an XM18, and I've known all along that the XM18 is going to be nicer in several ways, or at least it should, than the Zero Tolerance production version of the knife. But I had a little less curiosity than I would have if I'd never owned that ZT, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So anyway, time will tell after I finish this weekish long test drive with this one whether I feel like I need to get a real XM18. And I've shopped so many times for XM18s, and I've had some in my cart even, and I've been so close a number of times to XM18s that I feel like I kind of know what I would want if I was to get one. I think I would get a vintage series XM18 3.5 inch Bowie in 01 tool steel if I could find one. That might be a bit of a stretch to ask for, but there's a ton of variations of this knife out there, and I think that's the one that, to me, I just think is most alluring. Anyway, let's talk about this one, because that's what we're really here for. So, this is a DLT Trading exclusive XM18. The easiest way to tell that is because it has the fuller, both sides of the blade. I believe DLT is the only person who offers that. I'm pretty sure it's literally their kind of exclusive blade shape, if you will. So I was a little bit curious about the fuller. I remember when it was coming out, I'd seen a number of people that thought it looked awesome, were pretty stoked about it, and then I saw quite a few people who were not on board with it, who just thought it was dumb and pointless, and they milled a groove into the knife for no reason. What I will say is, for me, it middle finger flicks like a dream. So I love that the fuller's there. In fact, that makes me consider this version of the knife a lot more, because I like to middle finger flick my knives. And yeah, we'll talk more about that in a little bit, but this one has the fullers, so it's a DLT Trading exclusive. It's an M390 blade steel. You can see that marked right there. It is coated. I'm not positive what coating they've done here. I think this is their DLC, which it might be PVD, but whatever it is, it's done supremely well. I really like this finish. It's still got like a high shine to it where you're like still seeing, it almost seems like the grain of the metal itself of the M390, but it's coated, and it's coated evenly, and it seems very resistant to, pardon me, it seems very resistant to any kind of wear or stuff like that. So I like the coating. The handle scales, or scale, our show side scale is in orange G10, and I think it looks fine. I wouldn't pick orange for myself personally. It's a little too Halloween Town for me, but I don't hate it. I'm not opposed to orange. It's just not my preference. And the good news is with Hinderers, there's a lot of extra scale and hardware and everything options for these that you can get straight from Hinderer. I will say, from what I've seen, I think they're pretty wildly expensive when you're paying like, I don't know, I feel like they're right around like $60, sometimes more, for a G10 scale for one side of the knife. Seems a little steep to me compared to other alternatives, but at least there's the option to do all that to your knife. So, orange G10, I believe the liner underneath it is titanium, I'm almost certain. And then the lock side of the knife, or the clip side of the knife, is of course this nice thick titanium slab. We have the Hinderer over travel stop, which you can just kind of see under the tip of the clip there. So there's that disc, all the typical Hinderer hardware, Hinderer clip. This is an XM18. Everything here is what you can expect. What I do love, however, is that this lock side and even the scale, or the liner under the scale, are coated, and the clip, everything is coated exactly to match the coating on the blade. I think that's a really good touch. I like that they did that. I think looking at this knife lock side, it's almost perfect. Again, not crazy about this. I'd maybe want like a nice OD green or carbon fiber, or like a black micarta would be really cool. Something dark that would kind of offset well with this stuff a little bit better, I would appreciate. And then I think also if you were to do all blacked out hardware on here, man, that would be extra. Or bronze or something, I don't know. But again, the spec on this knife is not offensive to me. Like, this is still a really cool knife, and I don't dislike it at all. I just, with how much variety there is at Hinderer, I would spec it exactly how I want it. It would be important to me to get the one that is what I want, because there are options there. It's not like Chris Reeve, where there's virtually no options. So, all of that is good. I think we've talked about all the materials now, the construction, everything that's going on here. We do have a stainless steel interface, a lock bar insert, so it is hardened steel on the M390 tang down there for lockup, which I like. This knife essentially is designed to compete, or it's even if it's not designed to compete, it does compete directly with knives like the Sebenza. And I guess the Strider SNG. Those would be what are considered like the trinity of knives in this class, right? And so for US made, US production, American companies that are making these kind of higher end folders, that's what you're looking at. This knife on paper, and now that I have it in person, I can say confidently I vastly prefer to the Chris Reeve. The SNG, it gets a little hairy. I actually quite like the SNG. Later today, I'm getting a very special SNG that's not made by Strider. It'll be one of the new ProTech ones. I'll let exactly what that is be a secret until you see that video. But yeah, the quandary for me becomes between this and the SNG. To me, it's very simple between this and the Chris Reeve, which one I'd prefer to have. Even finding a really good deal on a Chris Reeve, if I could find one in perfect shape for $250, I still wouldn't buy one. That's my preference, and I'm fine with it if other people do love that knife. If you want to know more of why I feel that way, watch my week-long carry challenge, where I spent a week with one and tried to figure out if I was missing out on it. I don't feel that I've ever been missing out on that knife. It's just not my preference for a multitude of reasons. So this is much more in my wheelhouse. And I think a lot of people can tell that as they've grown to learn what my preferences are by watching a lot of my videos. And I think that's why a lot of people have wanted me to review one, because this is the knife that makes more sense in that category. But again, I think the SNG may also. So maybe one of these days I'll borrow a buddy's SNG or something, just a fairly basic version, and see how that stacks up compared to this. But anyway, my kind of criticisms of this knife I think are a good place to start, and then I'll finish with what I like about it so far. My criticisms, number one, the jimping. I don't like all of this jimping up here. It's not like the roughest jimping I've ever felt, but it's also right, and a lot of people have said this before, it's right where you're using the flipper tab. When you're using this knife with the flipper tab, you're landing right on this jimping, and it doesn't feel good. That jimping doesn't need to be all the way back here, in my opinion. If they had put the little bit that's on the blade, maybe 1 or 2 notches right up here to like where the stop pin is, I could see that. But extending it down to where your finger lands as you're coming down with the flipper tab, I don't like that. I don't think it's a good design. I think that's a bad design, in my opinion. Rick Hinderer may have a reason for doing that. I would prefer it without it. The other jimping all over down here, let's see if I can get that to focus for you. All over down here, it's the same. It's not the most aggressive jimping. This isn't like so sharp that it hurts or anything like that. I don't have dainty little fingers for all of you who are gonna accuse me of that for saying I don't like jimping. I just think that jimping is overrated. I think if we were to more accurately assess the need of jimping for the people who are really using these knives and what they're really using them for, we'd find that most jimping is dramatic overkill, where it's a feature that tells people that this knife is built to go farther, but it doesn't actually get it farther, if that makes sense at all. The ergos on this knife are really, really good. If you took all the jimping off of this knife and you made it smoother everywhere, I wouldn't feel worried that this knife is going to slip out of my hands, because the cutouts for my fingers and this insane guard that you get from the flipper tab and just the shape, the profile of this handle, it locks me in. Jimping or not, I feel locked into this knife. And so I get that maybe for first responders who have gloved hands and all of that jazz, that's not me. And so it's fair if that's their answer at Hinderer, and it probably is, because I'm pretty sure that's what Rick Hinderer designed this knife to be, as kind of a first responder's knife. But my preferences, I'd prefer to just alleviate 95% of this jimping, if not 100% of it. The little bit that kind of does make sense to me, I will say, where the release is for the lock bar, it does make it easier to disengage, so that's a little bit nice, and that also happens to be the least deep cut jimping on the entire knife. So jimping is a number one thing that I don't really like. Another thing is the shape of the flipper tab. I'm just not a fan of the like snaggle tooth that it waves up this way. I feel like it could be less pointed right here where you're grabbing onto it, and yeah, I don't know. I don't necessarily get the shape of it, and couple that with where your finger lands. The flipper on this knife, it functions for deploying the knife just fine, but it's not like, there are many flippers that I've used, flipper tabs, that are so much more enjoyable to sit there and fidget with. And even when you're not fidgeting, when it comes to just pulling the knife out to use it, it's nicer to have a flipper tab that feels better. I don't see the argument for this shape here. That's me. The other thing that I'm not crazy about, and this is a preference thing, again, the pocket clip on this knife. I know there are quite a few people who adore this pocket clip, who really like it. I prefer deep carry clips. That's just my preference. On any knife, I can pretty confidently say, on any knife at this point, I prefer a deep carry clip. I don't know, I can't think of a knife where I would prefer to have more knife sticking out of my pocket for my carry preferences. I understand the arguments for wanting, like, people who grab their knife like this. That makes sense to me. The way I grab any knife out of my pocket, a primary folder in my front right pocket, I slide my thumb down this side of the knife, and then I grab the bottom of the pocket clip, and I pull the whole thing out from there. I don't have any knives where that doesn't work, and so I don't have any knives where I have to grab from here. I don't find myself doing that. That's my carry preference, and I understand. Again, they don't have to design this knife for me. I get why this knife is designed the way it is, but to me, that's outside of my preferences. So, I think that's fair to say. There may well be, and I'm fairly certain there probably are, some deep carry clip options that would work for this knife aftermarket. I've never owned one, so I've never had the need to look for one. If I got one, I probably would be the person who would put a deep carry clip on this, and that might make some of the purists mad, but I would prefer this knife with it. And one of the things I loved about the zero tolerance version of this knife is that it had, in my opinion, a great deep carry clip. I really, really liked the deep carry clip, the way it came all the way to the very butt of the knife. That's what I want, a deep carry clip, and it functioned well for me. So I wish that this had the same clip that the zero tolerance lesser version of this knife gets. So I guess that'll be worth whatever it's worth. Now the things that I do really like, because I think that's all of the negatives really, what I do like are the ergos overall. Even with this jimping that's pretty aggressive, it doesn't ruin the ergos for me. I'd prefer it without it, but the way that this handle is shaped for my hand fits really, really well. It's the right amount of space in each of the grooves. It's the right amount of space for if I want to like choke back a little bit, if I want to move my hand. If I'm in the forward finger choil, it's almost more comfortable. I really, really like using the forward choil. What's funny is I'd probably get one without the forward choil if I was buying my own, but I like it when it's there. Like the functionality of it, I enjoy. My personal preference, I'd rather have that extra little bit of edge, and I don't find myself in real application often using that forward choil on this knife, so I would get it without it, but when I do use it, it feels very good. Yeah, the ergos are great, and when I put it in a reverse grip, still very good. It falls apart a little bit for me in like draw cut. It's not the worst, but it's not great, and then it's definitely in like reverse grip draw cut, just the angles. That's not a grip that I can foresee many people ever using on this knife, but it's not good if you plan on it. So yeah, saber grip is good, hammer grip is good, reverse grip is good, and in reverse grip, I will say the angle that they've put here makes a lot of sense, and now that I'm doing it, I feel like I didn't even quite necessarily realize this before. This might be more jimping than I'm okay with on the knife. This little traction spot right here where my thumb lands, I don't mind that at all. And I don't really feel that when I'm in a typical grip on the knife, so that jimping's going to pass. I'm okay with that jimping. That's a spot where, to me, it makes sense, because in a reverse grip, it's great to have that extra little bit right there. So, the ergos are a definite pass. This one, with the tri-way, it feels, honestly, to my memory, exactly like my ZT did on bearings. And my zero tolerance was dialed really, really well. I've handled other ones that the action wasn't as good as mine, so I might have just had an excellent example. But this is as smooth as that ZT was, and that action on the ZT was one of my favorite knives. Largely because the action was so good. It's just a lot of fun to play with. So with the flipper, it's great. I don't find myself using the flipper repeatedly all that much because I don't like the shape of the flipper and where my finger lands, as stated. But with this fuller, this one middle finger flicks really, really well. So I love that I've got this workaround for not loving the flipper tab. Having this additional deployment method works great. You can also, if you position your hand right, just use the thumb studs, and that works as well. Holes are greater than studs. Grooves are kind of derivative of a hole, so I find myself using the fuller more often than using the thumb studs. And yeah, I would say the order of which I find myself wanting to deploy this knife, it goes fuller, middle finger flick, then flipper, then thumb studs would be like my preference on opening it. But there's something about having multiple deployment methods that to me is fun. I like that this has a variety of ways that I can open it. So I guess the last thing I haven't really talked about that I wouldn't necessarily call a positive or a negative would be the way it carries so far. I've had this knife in pocket in a pair of jeans for a little bit, and then last night on my family walk I was wearing some like pretty thin shorts, not like basketball shorts, but lightweight, like shorts I only wear in summer. And the knife is not light, but it's not crazy heavy. It's a little bit thick, but it's not stupid thick. The pocket clip isn't my favorite, but it works fine. It's just okay in pocket to me. The angle, I'll say, that it kind of tucks back into the pocket, I like. I like the way that it tries to like combat its size and weight by just going in kind of on an angle. Plus that puts the flipper tab like down out of the line of my hand if I am reaching in for my wallet or something. And this flipper tab is pretty egregious if you do come into contact with it inside your pocket. It's just a little bit rough and sharp. But yeah, it just carries okay to me. It's definitely not on any top lists of best knives in pocket, but it's also not the worst. I've encountered knives that have pocket clips that make them terrible, or their dimensions make them terrible, or the orientation of the clip makes it terrible. And on this, I feel like everything is just fine about the way it carries. It's not bothersome to me. I don't hate having it in my pocket, not even close, but it's not like a carry dream. I don't think it's designed to be either. So I guess that'll kind of be my first impressions. I really like this knife. It's one that, yeah, I don't know. I feel like one of these days, the perfect spec one is going to show up right in front of me at the time when I've got the money to burn, and I'll end up getting one. But it's just hard. Like at this price range, I don't know if it's, if it's hipster of me or what. But like, there's something about these cost $450, $500 depending on which spec you get. Maybe they're under $450. They're over $400 and typically under $500 for an XM18 3.5 inch from what I've seen. There's just so many knives at this point, so many that are really, really good from a number of other makers that just kind of excite me more than the Holy Trinity at this point. Like, the S&G is really cool as well, but I also just feel like I'd rather have the ProTech S&G that I've got on the way than a real S&G, me personally. And I know that might be heresy to people who are Strider fanboys, but with the XM18, I feel like it's just kind of the same thing, where it's like, I really, really like it, but I don't know that I feel like I need to have one for my collection to be complete. The real assessment, I think, at the end of trying this out for a week is going to be, will I feel like I'll miss putting it in my pocket and using it at the end of it? And at this point, I don't really think I will. Part of that might be the version, though. Maybe if I do get that perfect vintage series Bowie, then I'll love that so much that it'll just have that factor for me. But I can't see myself at the moment. If this was my knife, if this wasn't a loaner, and I had just spent all that money on it, I imagine in like a month I'd be flipping it. I'd be selling it to get something else, because it just doesn't excite me. Like, I don't have this magnetic draw toward it like I do to some other knives. And I don't know, in my opinion, if you're looking at one of the Trinity, if there's one that does that to you, like you just feel like you have to have it, by all means. They're all nice knives that function well and are well made and seem to have good warranties, and they're in the US and like all these things, right? But to me, when I'm looking at spending $400, $450 on a knife, if I step that up $100, which is a lot of money, but it also isn't, then I'm in Arius territory. And if you ask me if I think this knife competes at all with the Koenig Arius, the answer would be absolutely not, for my preferences. And there are other knives like the Arius out there that are $100-$200 more than these, and I just feel like are so much more exciting. And then there's other knives that are $100 less than these that I get every bit as excited about as I do with these. So I don't know how much sense that makes. I'm just trying to be transparent about where I stand right now on them. I like this way more than a Sebenza. Way more. But I don't know that I like it way more than other knives that are out there for $300 right now, or for $700, or depending on what budget you give me, I can think of things that are exciting. But if you told me right now, Jake, here's $450 to spend on any knife you want, I don't know that I would pick this. It's very good. It's not perfect for me, and it's not that exciting to me. And it probably shouldn't be that exciting. This knife has been out for a long time now. There's so much competition that is trying to outdo this knife, and the Sebenza, and the SNG, and I think there's a lot that, objectively speaking, kind of are beating those knives. But there's a reason why these have a reputation and a name to them, and why they're a benchmark in the community. So I respect that they do that, and I respect how well made they actually are. But I don't know. I guess I've gotten a little philosophical and didn't necessarily mean to. So that'll be my first impressions. Maybe I'll have more of a conclusion. I should, by the time I'm ready to do the full review. But in the meantime, this has been the Hinderer XM18 3.5 inch DLT trading exclusive with the Fuller in M390, and I think DLC, maybe PVD, I don't know. It's coated, and the orange show scale, and it's very nice. It is a very well-made knife. The action is great. The ergos are very good. It's fun to play with. It's okay to carry. It's not necessarily what I would think of if I designed a perfect knife in my head, but it's very, very good. And I totally get the hype behind this one. I understand the hype behind this one way more than I do the Chris Reeve. So take that for whatever it's worth to you. Anyway, this has been fun. Stay tuned for my full review on this guy. Should be in about a week, maybe a couple days more than that. And I've actually got a few more knives on the way. So things are going to get crazy here with a lot of videos. I'll probably be posting several a day for the next little while so that I can stay on top of everything that's on my plate. Anyway, thanks guys. This has been fun, and appreciate you watching.